The girl in the basement. Jeanette and I went back to the house in Holt Summit, Missouri. We're there, in the basement.
Frankly, her mouth was moving, and she was like moaning, and there was hair like this, and it was over the mouth, and the mouth was slightly moving, and it smelled like fish. And I was like trying to figure out it was bad.
Her head was out of the bag?
No, her hair was on her face, and I could only see her mouth. And it was moving a little bit. And it smelled like fish.
And the rest of her body was
in the bags, like zipped. Yeah.
Zipped up to her neck.
But I could see hair, matted hair, and a mouth. And that was it. Moving. And then my sister was on the other side. And then I was like, well, should we get her some... We were trying to figure out what to do for her. That's all I remember. And that was all I remember. And as far as that moment, then that's what 30 years has been about. And I have no idea why, except in my nightmare later, like a real... Then she starts getting out of the bag and starts saying, you'll never forget, you'll never forget. And then I fold her up and I slide her under my bed and I break it into 1,000 pieces, and it's just a ton of shards of glass, and it's gone.
Jeanette says this girl was not alive. Couldn't have been. She moved because they bumped her. But the memory is fuzzy, disjointed. I recently saw a movie called Skinamarink. It's about two children. Their father goes missing in the middle of the night. My husband hated that movie, didn't get it. I, on the other hand, was terrified. The movie is not cohesive. It's unsettling. Nothing is fully visible, but the kids are in danger. I thought about Jeanette the entire time. Even made that comment after it was finished. Jeanette says her dad's indiscretions were already happening during this time frame. The girl in the basement time frame.
I know that when I was in 5th grade, he asked if he could talk with me. He took me outside and he said, it's a beautiful starry night. And he goes, I just want you to know I love you more than anyone, maybe even more than your mother. And he said, have I ever hurt you? I said, no. But I felt I never liked to be by myself. I said, no. And he goes, are you sure? You're sure I've never hurt you? I said, no. And he goes, if I ever have hurt you, I am deeply sorry and I did not mean to. And you're sure I've never hurt you? And I said, I'm sure. But later, as the PTSD tends to do, then more and more came out. Rather than just waking up with him on me with his hand over my mouth, those things started to evolve into what was really going on.
Previously on The Toll. Poison. Control.
And Dad turned around and said her last husband died under suspicious circumstances.
The initial event was toxicological in nature.
Because Roy did not go ahead and die right away, I suppose that it's probably more probable that his dementia was a different type.
I point by point verified with her via email over time, using time as my weapon.
He just laughed and laughed and laughed. He said, that was a fat check.
It's tragic, really.
I don't believe in coincidence.
We all have a story.
Nobody was able to make it because everybody was sick.
A dark secret wrapped in emptiness and regret.
Within a year, her entire nuclear family died.
Tons and tons of chemicals.
The Toll. I'm Nancy Simpson. I'm an award-winning journalist who has spent decades chasing stories and investigating cases across the Ozarks. In a note written in 2011, 13 years after Roy's visit to the Mayo Clinic, Jeanne writes to her daughter, Jeanette, that she tried to sugarcoat a lot of what was going on with Roy, hoping doctors could get him diagnosed. She writes, I know Roy didn't sound crazy. That part of his brain was functioning well. He sounded very logical when he told you that I had gotten hooked on prescription drugs, started stealing money, and had even been running around with other men. She writes there was a point where she was too sick to go to work, so she lied about meeting a man, a client, so she wouldn't appear lazy. When Roy checked up on her story, he found it wasn't true. She says migraines and the medicine that she had been prescribed were behind her shaking incident. Time and again, Jeanne has an answer for everything, in great detail. 3 years later, in 2014, Jeanne emails Jeanette a small book, 6 pages outlining her time with Roy and her side of the story. After thinking he suffered from sunstroke at the golf tournament and not getting any real answers, she writes, "I never saw the real Roy again, except for glimpses. Roy was shipped to the Mayo Clinic. I have those records. Admission date is September 21st, 1998. For 8 days, specialists worked to find a cause for his sudden decline. He was 59. There's many pages. It talks about Roy falling down on the golf course. Slurred speech, no real cause found by local doctors. It talks about some of his erratic behavior. It's also written in the Mayo report that Roy suspects his wife has tried to poison him, that he's thrown her out a dozen times, and has filed for divorce. Mentally, the report says his memory was intact, attention fair, concentration poor. Quote, the patient was paranoid about his wife and spiteful about his mother. It reviewed tests from the county hospital. Everything looked okay except his neuropsychometric testing. It showed gross diminished executive function. That evaluates things like intelligence, planning, attention, memory, language, mood state, and emotion. Also quality of life and personality styles. That kind of thing. The records show he had bipolar disorder, which could account for his mood, but that also his mental status could be from a high level of cadmium. It's a poison that can cause neurological problems. It was found in his urine. He tells the doctors he's been burning stuff in a barrel near his home, and others have burned batteries. He also tells them others have burned meth in that barrel. 3 days later, in that same report from the Mayo Clinic, it says doctors doubt what is happening to Roy is neurological and that the initial events sound toxic, metabolic in nature. Tests didn't show cold drugs or meth were the culprits. He had elevated calcium. Things were looking pretty good, and doctors deemed him safe to return home with medication and a daily check-in with a psychiatrist. His GAP score, which rates mental illness, was out of 41, which is on the poor side. That's when he was admitted. Upon release, it was 60. So it was going up. Being away from the house, it was getting better. One of Roy's quotes in the Mayo papers, he said, "I told you I was normal." Doctors described his comment as condescending. Here's part of an email from Jeanne to Jeanette. It's January 3rd, 2008. Quote, the only time I talked to Glenn is Roy's brother, is after I met with doctors at the University of Iowa on December 1st, 1998, and they told me that they thought Roy had Yakov-Creutzfeldt dementia and that his brain would continue to deteriorate until he died. Now, Jeanne, saying doctors told her this information, she repeats it in another email. CJD, as a diagnosis, is not written in any medical reports I've seen. No mention of his hunting, fishing, or any potential problems with that in the Mayo report. Jeanne tells people Roy likely got it from eating squirrel brains. Remember that part? Clint shrugs this whole thing off. He says his dad was an avid hunter and had eaten squirrel brains his entire life.
Grandma had called me over the squirrel brains thing. She said, what the hell? Your dad's been eating that shit since he was 10 years old and was big enough to hold up a shotgun. I said, I know it. He knows what he's doing. And there wasn't any indication from the Mayo Clinic or anybody else that was, any kind of a problem. So it was kind of ignorant.
Roy's obituary makes it clear he was an avid outdoorsman. He loved hunting and fishing. Jeanne then changes Roy's diagnosis to Pick's disease. Pick's disease is a rare type of age-related dementia that affects the frontal lobes of the brain and causes speech problems, behavior difficulties, and eventually death. According to what I found online, this would give him 8 to 9 years to live. As I go through all of these emails, Jeanne, the mom, changes this story. First, it's doctors at the University of Iowa Medical Center who inform her of Roy's fate. Then it changes to Roy's brother, Glenn, being the one who told her. And then it switches to Roy's cousin being the one who informed her of the Pick's disease diagnosis. Jeanne sticks with that for 3 emails spanning 3 years. This particular email is a little confusing. It's from 2014. It says doctors in Iowa showed her Roy's CAT scan comparison to the one taken at the Mayo Clinic 3 months earlier. Jeanne's saying it showed the frontal lobe of his brain shrinking and how he'd have to be institutionalized for the rest of his life. A reminder that Roy had already filed for divorce long ago. She adds how she kept hoping doctors could fix Roy and wanted to work things out with him, but that he wanted the divorce and laws in Iowa would ensure it would go through. She writes, I was left to be the one to tell his mother, his brother, and his sons. Not sure what she was left to tell them, but I asked Clint and he assured me that he never heard from Jeanne about this. In the end, doctors at the Mayo Clinic wrote that with Roy's numbers improving, they would recommend an occupational therapy consult, and then said, patient is safe to go home. It was amended to say that after a discussion with a judge and the legal department, Roy needed to be transferred to Jefferson County Hospital for a secondary commitment. Jeanette recalls conversations throughout this time with her mom.
And she also said that the doctors kept asking her, has he been around anything that could have made him sick? And she said, I kept telling him Roy was burning things in a barrel. He was absorbing all those fumes, and she said they were pretty sure that wasn't really what was happening, but they kept asking me things, and they'd write things, little things down in their notebook and shake their heads, and she goes, mostly they just stopped talking to me about it. She said that Roy fished a lot in his life. She said he ate all the fish he caught, and so that perhaps that's where he got anything that was misaligned in his system.
So Jeanette says her mom told her, in a conversation Jeanette took notes on, March 29th, 2006, that heavy metals can make you go crazy and that they had screened Roy for metals. This was the first time Jeanette had ever heard Roy had been tested for heavy metals. In the phone conversation with her mom, the one Jeanette recorded, it's brought up twice. Jeanette keeps pressing her mom on it.
And poor old Roy was just crazy. They never did figure out what it was that was.
No, that's what bothers me.
What it was that happened to him.
You told me there's metals in him, and
yes.
And if they never figured it out, then it had to be metals. And I don't know why you told me before that it was Pick's disease if it really was metals.
That's what, they told me at first that it was Jakob Creutzfeldt dementia. Before that, before they had him diagnosed, mostly the doctors wouldn't talk to me. But one doctor one time asked me if he had been exposed to a lot of metals and that sort of thing. We fished out of a farm pond, and we ate the fish that we caught. And whether or not there was some contamination there, I have no idea. I told the people that Roy had eaten fish that he caught for practically all of his life.
Jeanne, the mom, held on to this theory that if they find mercury, it could be from all the fish out at Vernon's pond. It's the pond near her parents' house in LaBelle. In an email, January 5th, 2008, labeled Apology and Mercury and Insurance. Yeah. So Jeanne, the mom, writes, in looking it up, it seems that the most common way that this is transferred to humans is through eating river fish. Mostly the only fish that we ate all came from Vernon's pond. But those older fish had to come from somewhere originally. I know that's stretching it, but your dad got sick, Roy was sick, you were sick, and I was sick. Come to think of it, Jim was at Mom and Dad's just before he came here, before he died, and they went to Vernon's. It is a little out there, but it makes more sense than me poisoning a bunch of people. Jeanette goes back to it a little later, addresses it again.
Just not knowing all the facts and then finding out, gosh, it was kind of a huge deal to find out that Roy had metals in him. It kind of floored me for some reason.
And I don't even know what kind, or the doctor just said that they were out of balance.
Yeah.
And then nobody ever referred to it again. That was before they had him diagnosed.
Well, you would think that if it was something that you were suspected, that the police would be involved or something.
Yeah. The type of dementia that he had, they originally had said Jakob Creutzfeldt, but because he didn't go ahead and die right away, they did tell me that the particular type of dementia that he had could only be determined by a brain biopsy, which could only be done, of course, after he was dead.
Yeah.
And so,
well, didn't she say something like maybe?
And so they did say that there was a possibility that it was Pick's dementia, but they said it was hereditary through a male line in the family, and as far as his mom or anyone could figure out, there had never been any of that in the family.
You don't get better with brain diseases like CJD and Pick's. You only get worse. And they kill you. And Roy didn't die. It took me a very long time to organize, read, sort, and log all of these hundreds of emails. It's a swirl. Word salad. So many of them Jeanette didn't even read. Clint, Roy's son, says his dad was released from the Mayo Clinic, and things were actually looking up.
He had agreed to go for some counseling, which went pretty well, I guess. And they thought he was pretty well adjusted and he didn't have any giant problems and they could just shoot the shit and get some small things worked out.
Clint says he was trying to move on, actually.
Quickly, for an old guy, I guess, he went back to bachelor mode. He was ready to find wife number 5. He's like me. You leave me in the dust, I'm not going to cry. I'm looking for the next chick that's standing behind your sister. And he's the same way.
Clint says the meds were heavy at times.
They had put him on some meds that really made him loopy too, I guess. But that was kind of what he needed. They needed him to get out of that break of thinking that Jeanne was still right behind him and she was still trying to poison him, even though she was out of sight and out of mind.
But was she? Jeanette has this story.
I remember one time she said, it just really hurt my feelings. I just happened to be in the area. I was driving by Roy's house from my apartment, and I saw him pull out, and there was a woman in the car. And so I followed them for a little bit over to the grocery store. And she said, and that was our thing to do. We would go to the grocery store together. I thought, wait a minute. So I looked it up on the map. Where was her apartment? Where was his house? And where was the grocery store? And none of that looked like a chance thing. It looked like she had been lying in wait for him to see where he was going and had seen him with this woman.
It's December 1998, sometime over that weekend. Someone broke a window on the door to Roy's home and went inside. It's a police report I didn't have. Lieutenant Bell with the Ottumwa Police Department called to tell me that they found one more report. It's dated December 15th, and it was filed by Blanche. That's Roy's mother. The report says entry was gained, couldn't establish if anything was missing, and it was unknown who did this. His mom told the officer that Roy wasn't living in the house at the time because he was having mental problems. Jeanne says police never contacted her about it. She also writes she was in the house 3 times, and then a visit where she found out that Roy was sick, so she brought him some soup. She wrote in an email, he thanked me, took the soup, and closed the door. And then this, Jeanne to Jeanette. Jeanne, the mom, writes, I think I figured out the police found me standing in the kitchen report. She puts all that in quotes. That last day that I went to see Roy, I knocked and yelled at the door, but he was in the basement with the washing machine out of balance. The door was open, so I went in and stood in the kitchen and hollered down the stairs for him. He ran upstairs, very upset at me for coming in, and told me to get out because I didn't live there anymore. We continued to talk for a while, but then he got angry again and ordered me out. He accused me of breaking the garage door, among other things. He probably called the police and reported that I'd been standing in his kitchen and that he had to force me out of the house. So she admits to continually showing up in the house when she's not supposed to be there. It points less to paranoia on Roy's part and more toward the fact that Jeanne did keep showing up there. The police officer in Ottumwa who helped me did not locate this report either. After a trip to Utah, Jeanne writes that she dropped by to see if Roy would look at pictures of Luke, her grandson, and talk to her. She keeps putting herself back at that house. Remember, in the Mayo report, it states Roy had told them that he suspects his wife was trying to poison him and that he'd thrown her out of his house about a dozen times. Were Roy's spidey senses going off because she was lingering? Following? But then things took a drastic turn. Here's Clint, Roy's son.
I think he went through some kind of a physiological withdrawal, that she may have been poisoning him with something that made him want more of it, something addicting. But they never could figure it out. And even the FBI told me I had no fucking clue what she did. He said, I know she did it. That's what the agent told me. He said, I know she did it, but there's no way in hell I can prove it. I don't have enough to put her in jail, which frightens me. This is America, goddammit. I don't know.
Years later, in an email to Jeanette, Jeanne, the mom, wrote that she'd gotten word Roy had been taken into custody again because he went to a gun show, bought a gun, and threatened to kill Jeanne and his mother, Blanche. Jeanne wrote that a friend turned him into police, and they took him to the University of Iowa Medical Center. The lieutenant at the Ottumwa Police Department says he did not find a police report on this. Jeanne says she called Roy during Thanksgiving and told him that she was going to a conference in Iowa City in December and wanted to see him. He said yes, and then no. Jeanne says the reason she went to the hospital anyway was because the doctors called and asked her to come. Jeanne, the mom, says a team of 7 doctors in Iowa met with her. There's a document I want to touch on that I found in these stacks of papers. It's what Jeanne leans on when she says she's innocent of hurting Roy. It's a written affidavit from her former boss at the Chamber of Commerce in Ottumwa. I have so many questions, and I can't wait to reach out for a bonus episode to get those answers when this all comes out. Here's what I have for now, though. Jeanne and Roy were over in 1999. This was written almost a decade later, after her third husband's death. It's for the civil suit to come. The court record from the attorney has Jeanne's name spelled correctly, but the written paper from her former boss has a wrong spelling for Jeanne. The couple has lived in Minnesota for a long time now. I can see that through social media. Now, this man talks about Jeanne and Roy being kind when they moved into the neighborhood, how he structured the hiring process very carefully when Jeanne wanted a job at the chamber so it wouldn't show bias since they were neighbors, how Jeanne was professional, and how Jeanne and Roy had a loving relationship. Then, day after day, he wrote that he saw the effects of a broken woman, how Roy burned everything that meant anything to Jeanne in a barrel. He says he and his wife could watch Roy's bizarre behavior on a daily basis because his kitchen window was adjacent to their sunroom. He writes how the house was a pigsty and describes what he saw inside the house, like a folding chair with a small TV on a small table. How everything was stacked around him and the house was full of junk. How Roy would unpack things and simply lay them aside and go on to something else. We only saw activities that were window high, but nothing that was below. That's a strange line for so much detail. He writes Roy's mom asked them to collect the mail, and we weren't snooping, but he says Roy had 8-track tapes, several sets of dinnerware, chocolate-covered cherries, and several pairs of shoes delivered, and added that Roy had not been paying his bills. Then there's this written story about police showing up to Roy's house to take him to the hospital. Roy told police of a leaky fitting in the upstairs bathroom. This man writes, "It seems he, Roy, replaced the toilet stool and did not get the water supply line securely tightened, and it dripped. This man says several days later the couple came home and saw water leaking from the siding and foundation wall. How police tried to get in, but the door was locked, but then found a pane of glass was broken from the outside and entered the house." This man put that time frame in November. Now, this man also says he saw water streaming down the entryway, and there were containers, pots, pans, bowls, bottles, everywhere to catch water. He writes everything was soaked and the ceiling was sagging, and some areas where the ceiling was on the floor. He says he went upstairs and found the toilet leaking. So police just let him walk around the house that isn't his? And with all these structural problems? That could be dangerous, right? Police didn't notice all the pots and pans and leaking water when they went in to get Roy? Well, the timeline from the broken window pane from the police report was December. This man, Jeannie's former boss, writes, "It appeared that when police were there to take Roy away to the hospital, they inadvertently shut off the wrong water valve, and the upstairs bathroom water remained operational. How this neighbor himself went down in the basement and shut off the main water line, taking note of the filth, not finding the words to describe it, saying, 'Let's just say that one would have to work hard to mess it up that much.'" Well, he says they left Ottumwa in July of 2000 and Jeannie left in April or May. He writes, "Jeannie left brokenhearted and virtually nothing else because Roy had destroyed everything else. In summary, we watched a caring, loving relationship dramatically cut short by Roy's behavior. I personally witnessed Jeannie's broken heart daily at work and was not surprised that her children convinced her to return to Utah and leave this sordid history behind her. We recall that one of Jeannie's children, Jeanette, had always been negative toward Jeannie, and so it would not surprise us if she would not support her mother when she needed help and support." End quote. I asked Jeanette. She says she has no idea who these people are, and she did nothing but support her mother. Her mother stayed with Jeanette when she moved to Utah and moved right down the street. The copy of the affidavit I have is not signed or notarized. Not saying that didn't happen. Just full disclosure, that's not the copy I have. The story about water running down the hallways, out of the siding, destroying the house, it's one, among many others, that Jeanette says her mom told her in person.
He had run through the house and he had signed his own name to any artwork she had done. He had bought a whole bunch of bonbons, like an exorbitant amount. He had bought a whole bunch of shoes that were all exactly the same. He kept painting the freezer different colors. He had left the water on in the house at one point, and the water had drained from upstairs all the way down the stairs and was rolling out the front door.
Roy's son, Clint, and his wife at the time, they weigh in on all of this in web sleuths. He says from the looks of the kitchen, Roy was making an attempt to find or clean out whatever crime evidence she had left behind. Whether it was to nail her or cure himself is anyone's guess, he says. The latter makes me sick. That's written in web sleuths. Clint disputes the other stuff, like her writing her name on the artwork or the freezer being painted over and over. I asked him in person, and he wrote that in web sleuths too. And then he writes they are two separate issues. One, the roof was damaged and water was leaking. That was after he was in assisted care living, and it was repaired. The other time was plumbing failure while he was living in the house. It was repaired too. It caused some damage, but nothing major. It didn't run down the stairs, out the windows, onto the streets, or any other such nonsense. No arc was involved. That sounds like Clint. Jeannie Forgy, the mom, goes to visit Jeanette, her daughter, in Utah to get away from the chaos of Roy for a minute. It's the spring of 1999. Jeanette started a small sleep study business. Jeanette has questions for her mom about Roy.
She came out, I think in March-ish to come see me because I was pregnant with my second child and she was due in August. So I was second trimester. And when she came out, I had a lot of questions for her on what was going on. I didn't understand the squirrel brains. I didn't understand why she was going back if someone was chasing her with an axe. All the things that didn't make sense to me, I was having a conversation with her about. She stayed at my house. Anyway, when she left, then I ended up very ill. And my throat just swelled up like a bullfrog. And I had to go into the doctor's office, and they said, "Oh my gosh, you have the mumps. The mumps don't even exist anymore." They were baffled. I think it was right then that they put me in the hospital, and they did a full body check on me. They decided I had something called parotidosis, extreme swelling of the parotid glands. And so they just did a full system check on me and ended up releasing me. They put me on a high-risk pregnancy after that.
Jeanette says her mom then moved to Utah 3 weeks later.
As soon as they decided that the divorce was going to happen, then she said, "Well, I'm going to get out of there. I feel like my life's in danger." She said, "I think I've had enough of all that. I've been getting some creepy phone calls. I think I need to move to Utah."
In an email from Jeanne to her daughter, years later, as Jeanette kept pressing for answers, so this was written in 2014, Jeanne, the mom, wrote, "I stayed in Ottumwa until April, and I might have stayed longer, but Roy kept threatening to get out and kill me. He had friends in the hospital call me and threaten to get me for Roy when they got out. Police suggested that I move and not tell anyone where I was going. It seemed a good time to go to Utah and be close to you and Will and Denise." But Jeanette, the daughter, says it was more than that. She sees that now. Once Roy rejected the modified prenup she had written to the attorney, it was over.
She said that she contested it because he was wanting her to repay all this money that she owed him. She didn't tell me that at the time, but later she told me that. At the time, she said she was contesting it because he didn't know his own mind and that she wanted to take care of him. But years later, she told me it's because he was demanding that she pay him back all this money she didn't have.
I want to throw in here, just make it clear, that from the time Jeanette was terribly sick from her care package that she got from her mother while on her church mission to Argentina, until what's about to happen next, Jeanette's been healthy. She's been away from her mom, who's been living in Missouri and then Iowa. 8 years of feeling great. Coming back from Argentina, Jeanette had to find the strength to even walk. She says her brother would wheel her around the block in a wagon when her legs would give out. Doctors were baffled, and an infectious disease specialist told her, "You are the healthiest young woman I have ever met to have sustained whatever attack that was." And Jeanette got better. And then in 1999, Jeanette says her mom moved right down the street from her in Utah, helping Jeanette, playing with little Luke. Jeanne, the mom, she looks healthy after claiming so many illnesses.
Whoa! You splattered all the water out of here. I just hear all these, you can die in a tap full of water stuff. This is really hard.
Colleen remembers seeing Jeanne a few years after working with her in Ottumwa. She says her old boss, Juanita, invited Jeanne, but says Juanita was hoping Jeanne wouldn't show. Said Juanita was aggravated with her business partner.
She's ran my business dry, and, she's never got, there's never any money to give me a paycheck, but she's always got money. And, she's always got some kind of illness for everybody to feel sorry for. And right now she's got lupus, but nobody can figure out what doctors told her that or how it's been proven or anything else. Sure enough, after I'd been there about half an hour, here comes Jeanne, and she sat down and she started telling me about all of her aches and pains and problems, and she was just a different person than when I'd left. She wasn't just on top of the world, happy-go-lucky, big smile Jeanne at all.
Jeanne was active in her daughter, Jeanette's life. At this point, Jeanette and her husband had a toddler and a baby on the way. Jeanette gets sick. Really sick.
So in July, I had a second incident happen, And not only was I having stroke-like activities, but my leg was swelling up on the right side, like right under my kneecap. And I had gone to the Instacare a couple times, and I said, what is happening to me? And my mom goes, show me your leg. And it was like bubbled up like a balloon. And she goes, oh, this is happening much faster than I thought. I remember that statement, and I didn't understand, like, what's happening much faster than you thought?
Jeanette didn't get any real answers from the doctors. That one word that keeps popping up, baffled, that goes here too. Poison? Never crossed her mind.
No, who would do that? Only a crazy person would think you're being poisoned, really. I mean, I didn't think that.
August. Jeanette has a baby girl, the one who will later eat the tainted Easter candy. And then Jeannie, the mom, created that online LDS singles ad and found Bruce, husband number 3. A few more things before we wrap up Roy's story. Jeanette says a few years later she spoke with Roy's friend. Things, even if a little, had improved for Roy.
And he got better. He got better. You know, the John Foley that I worked with, the neurologist, said it's very, very rare, if never, a neurological disorder does not improve. It's unraveling. You know, you continue to get worse. But Roy was getting better. And when I told her that in Utah one time up at her third husband's house, I said, well, and I talked with Ronita, and it sounds like Roy's getting better. And she said, oh, please don't say that.
Roy lived in assisted living for 10 years. Clint says his dad was never the same as before, but stabilized. Then Roy was diagnosed with kidney cancer.
We went to see him on 9/27/2009. It was a Sunday. And I knew he was sick already, but he hadn't told us, and he was wanting to. And he told my uncle that he was wanting to get it off his chest. And I think he knew he was going to die. And we went up to Iowa and took him out to Pizza Hut, and we were eating and everything. And we go back, and he needed a nap. And so we tucked him in bed, kissed him goodbye, and told him we loved him. We took off from Missouri, and he got up in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, to go pee, and he stood up and had some kind of a heart episode. And he fell face first. His chin caught on his bed frame. And the rest of him kept right on going and just snapped his neck. And that's what killed him. It wasn't the cancer that killed him. It was the fall and the subsequent breaking of his spine. I'm telling you, the guy's life is a tragedy.
Clint says what happened next was crazy and so unexpected.
The funeral home had already been alerted about. They were told by the FBI that when he dies, he's coming here, and then he doesn't stop here. You don't even park out front. You take him to Ames.
Ames Laboratory is the United States Department of Energy National Laboratory in Ames, Iowa. It's affiliated with the Iowa State University. They do have a chemical and biological sciences department, but tissue research, autopsies, doesn't pop up during a search. Certainly a government agency, though. In the days following Roy's death,
first law enforcement I talked to was the FBI right after Dad died. A couple days afterwards, he said there was pretty much a standing order that the second your dad hit the ground, he was to be taken to Ames, Iowa, and picked apart until they figured out what was wrong with him. And that's exactly what they did. They sent 7 pounds of him. There's some kind of a laboratory near the body farm in Tennessee. They sent 7 pounds of him to that laboratory for them to test stuff. And he came back and said, I know she's poisoned him, but we can't prove it. They gave it to the Attorney General, and him and 4 people looked it over and said, it's obvious, but she will never go to prison. You just got to let her go. And that happens a lot in poison cases, I guess. It seems to be a good way to get somebody away from you.
Clint says he saw the autopsy report. I do not have a copy of it.
He still had some elevated cadmium levels and some other heavy metals that weren't supposed to be there. The FBI guy summarized it for me. Somebody poisoned him, that's for sure, but we just can't prove it. That's how he summarized it.
But Clint says going through the house, his dad's house, was terrible.
Oh, God. Yeah. It was, yeah. We walked inside, and I was the only one that was in a good mood there because I kept thinking I'm going to be able to override this. This is going to be hard, but I can do it. I opened that fucking door. We walked inside, and I lost it. I mean, lost it. Everybody else was ready for it. But I thought I was going to be able to get through it, no problem. By the time we got to the end of it, I wanted out of the fucking fun house. And I didn't want to ever go back in it. Because I was starting to channel the shit that had gone on there in the last days. And he went through some hell. And I mean, the demons were chasing him when he got out of there. Hell bent for leather. He couldn't find any more corners to hide around from. It's amazing he just didn't go nuts and burn the fucking place to the ground or something.
In the Web Sleuths blog from 2010, Jeanette writes about the FBI coming to take Roy's body for a special investigation. Quote, 3 husbands' remains all being tested at the FBI at the same time. How many people can say that? Clint talks about his dad searching for proof, the accusations he was making about Jeannie.
He told me that that's why he was going through the house, and he knew he'd find it. And we found traces of him digging through shit and things in the house. I mean, he's going through chemicals and all kinds of shit trying to figure out what she was doing to him.
Colleen Finley says Roy confided in his friend Juanita that he felt Jeannie had bad intentions toward him.
She asked him what he meant by that, and he couldn't really pinpoint it, but he said he felt funny, and there would be times when he'd go to drink something or maybe use a condiment or something, and that she'd say, oh no, use this one. And he said, I just don't feel right. And he said, I just can't help but thinking that she's just trying to get rid of me.
Colleen says Juanita told her, after looking back, that things were out of sorts and Jeannie could have been messing with them at the office.
I wonder, and Juanita thought she did. Roy had told Juanita that he felt that she'd been trying to poison him, and Juanita said that after that she got to thinking, and she would recall where Jeannie would put down special salt and pepper shakers for their lunch, and Juanita would say, well, I was going to use, and she says, no, these are prettier, things like that. And she said, when I stop to think about it now and how I was feeling afterwards, she said, I can't help but to wonder if Roy wasn't right and if she wasn't trying to pull the same thing here. She said, I just wasn't myself there for a while. But who knows?
Colleen, she can't help but go through all the steps in her mind.
Yeah, because once you get ready to put on the table, whoever was getting that ready, like if it was coming out of the oven, somebody else would get the ketchup and mustard and the salt and pepper and stuff and take it out and put it on the table. She said, did you ever notice that it was usually Jeannie that did that? And I said, no, I never really did. And she said, well, it was.
Juanita M. Hootman. According to her obituary, she died on March 29th, 2002, at the hospital in Ottumwa. Her body was cremated and her family asked that donations be made to a breast cancer foundation. As for her friend, Juanita, who introduced Roy to Jeannie, it was another example of the toll.
She felt very guilty. She was your friend to the end. If you were friends with Juanita, she was a true blue friend. And there was nothing she wouldn't do for you. Oh, she was just such a sweet person. But she really, really felt that she did an injustice to Roy by introducing the two of them, Jeannie and Roy, to each other. And she really felt that she was partially, if not more than that, responsible for everything that had happened to Roy.
At the end of August 1999, the divorce between Roy and Jeannie is going through. Jeannie says she needs Jeanette, her daughter, to be there with her. This is not great timing for Jeanette.
most people wouldn't load up a 3-week-old baby and travel across the country anyway. But she had convinced me that she really needed my help. And so that she would help me with the babies. And, you know, so we got on the plane, and right when we got to LaBelle, then she said, we're going to take a shortcut to the parents' house, which ended up being this crazy long cut so she could see some old boyfriend that was married, and all sorts of stuff was going on. And I'm like, what is happening? And then when we got to the house, she said, oh no, you're not going to come to Iowa with me. You're way too sick. And I thought, why did I come out here? That was the purpose. I was supposed to come out here and help her. She said, you're far too sick. But what was strange is that I was getting sick, and I was seeing multiple things and weird migraines or weird double vision on things, and I was feeling faint, and I said, yeah, I better not go to Iowa. Well, fine. And then after we got on the plane to Missouri and then we landed and went to LaBelle, that's when I started feeling sick. And I thought maybe it was the peanuts I ate, because I don't know, I just thought peanuts are not good for migraines. Maybe the peanuts made me ill. I wasn't sure.
So Jeanette did not make the 1 hour, 37-minute trip from LaBelle to Ottumwa for the divorce hearing. She says everything was so off during the visit, but later, things came into focus.
At the time, she told me nothing, but that it was finalized and fine. But years later, then yes, she told me that she had been very worried. That's why she didn't want me to go with her, because she thought the judge was going to tell everyone that she owed all this money to Roy, which I didn't know at the time. And instead, she found out that his brother had signed the divorce paperwork, and she just got to walk out. So she was very relieved.
She says her mom never wanted her in that courtroom. Then why make Jeanette, her daughter, travel with a toddler and a newborn? Jeanette thinks now it was money to pay for the rental car, stuff like that. One more thing to add before we start to wrap up Roy Forgey's part in this mess, a.k.a. husband number 2. There's a handwritten letter husband number 3's family found in a box left behind by Jeanne. It has no date, and I have no idea if Roy ever read it. Jeanne writes about her love for Roy and how important their relationship is to her, how she's been 100% faithful to him and never committed the sin of lusting after someone in her heart. She writes, "You've compared the lying habit to an alcoholic problem, and I imagine it's a good comparison. I thought I had put the bottle down before, and for sure and certain Monday. I told you yesterday morning that I felt like I needed help with this problem. You said to consider what's important in my life and just do it, and that I'd have to do it myself. I do know what is most important in my life, and it's you. But tonight you caused me to realize that I do need help, but it's not from a counselor." She goes on to say they both need to go to church more and lean on meditation, prayer, and God. Flipping the page, she writes, "I've never been more frightened in my life than I am right now at the prospect of losing your love and losing you and knowing that it's my fault. You said you don't like me very well. I despise me. I've excused myself all my life of these little lies because I live a good, morally clean, spiritual life. I don't think my whole life is a lie, but these lies are sins." She goes on to say how much she loves him, and the past year has not been anything but what it seemed. The best thing since Adam and Eve. And then she signs it. "I love you. I'll always love you. Jeanne." Jeanette says Clint handed his dad the phone years later, and Jeanette was able to apologize for not seeing what she now believes was happening to Roy.
I know at the very end when he was still alive, 10 years later, and he was in that home, then his son had gotten in touch with me. We had communicated, and I said, "Do you mind if I say something to your dad? I want to apologize." He goes, "He's right here in the car with me." So he put the phone up to Roy, because Roy danced with me at my reception. He got on the phone, and I said, "Roy, I just want to tell you that I am so sorry that I did not believe you when you called me that time. He said, "Oh, that's fine. It's a long time ago," and very gracious and never had a bad word to say. And you could tell he was a little older, but I asked how I was doing, and that was about it. Gave the phone back. I got to say that I was sorry to him, and I really felt bad that I thought he'd gone crazy.
She says Roy was instrumental in saving her life. When things got rocky for Jeanette in the years to come, she says she reflected on Roy's experience and started taking a hard look at what was happening to her own body. As husband number 3, Bruce, was deteriorating, Jeanette picked up the phone.
I went, I've got to do something about this or I'm complicit. I am myself killing this man if this is true. I called the Mayo Clinic. So first, when I called the Mayo Clinic, I asked for Roy Forgey's doctor. And this was way back when. So they were able to get me the information on who Roy Forgey's doctor was. And I had no idea because I hadn't been part of his treatment. And I just said I was his daughter. And so they got the doctor on the phone with me. And I said, I am Roy's stepdaughter. And I just wondered if you could tell me what happened to him. Because my mother is married to yet another person and he's throwing up. And a lot of people are throwing up. And I'm just very worried. And if you could let me know what happened to Roy, I think I would feel a little better. And he said, well, you know HIPAA rules and all of that. And then he said, listen to me very carefully. And he leaned forward into the phone and he said, you have cause for concern. And I said, what? And he goes, you have cause for concern. And that's all I can tell you. Thank you. And that was the end of our conversation.
Clint, Roy's son, says his mind spins about it all the time.
Isn't it though? It's the strangest fucking story. And I know the truth is just right there. It's just laughing at us, you know. There are very few things I'm certain of about this, but one thing I'm sure of is that I didn't cut him any slack when he told me that she was poisoned. I thought he might be losing his fucking mind, but not long after that, he had me convinced, and I am sure of it to this day that she was doing it. The things that happened to him were too dramatic, too earth-shattering to have just happened by chance, you know? I mean, even if God was mad at him, he wouldn't have made him do that shit.
Clint says things could be so different. I asked Clint what the toll has been for him in all this.
For me, he'd still be hanging out with me. He was probably in better shape than I. He golfed all the time, and he'd grab a new pack of cigarettes and just walk around town, you know, for a couple hours at a time. So he was in great shape, and he didn't have any health problems. I was pretty sure he was going to make it to a good 80. You know, if he'd made it to 80, he would have passed last year, and that would have been a lot cooler. If he had been intact, whatever she did fucked up his wiring and ruined him. She ruined my dad. It just literally scrambled his fucking brain so bad that the neurologist couldn't even figure out what had happened to him.
Clint says he wants justice, here or there.
I wanted them to kick her ass. Because my dad he was larger than life. And she cut my kid and my grandkids off from enjoying it. You know, I'll be all right. I missed him and he changed, and I didn't get my dad my whole lifetime, but they didn't hardly get very much of him at all, and I'm pissed. When I get to heaven, me and her are going to fucking wrestle. And I know God's going to be pissed off, but we're going to wrestle. I'm going to get her ass in a mud puddle, and I'm going to kick the shit out of her for a little bit.
Roy died in 2009. It's around the same time Jeanette's oldest niece, her sister Chris's daughter, was diagnosed with thyroid cancer, the one who passed out while cutting carrots at a Christmas gathering. Jeanette says she reached out and tried to buy the girl a laptop or something fun to help her pass the time. No, Chris told her. She has everything she needs. Chris and her husband Willie have 8 children. Jeanette's Aunt Carol and others told her the young girl was in a tent in the living room during treatment and that you couldn't talk about cancer. Chris wouldn't have it. Next time on The Toll, Poison Control.
We lived in a burnt down house. The top floor had burned.
Yes, it's true. We did not have hot water in our house for 2 years.
And so she was always speculating whether there was some foul play from either her dad or her mom that may have killed someone.
They started having deeper financial issues, and the church would come and bring food.
I didn't know what to do, and I didn't know how to get Danny to stop being the way he was being.
Thank you for listening. The Toll Podcast, Season 2, Poison Control, is a production of The Toll, LLC. Creator, investigator, host, and audio producer, me, Nancy Simpson. Executive producer, Pamela Shelby. Original intro and recording by Jay Lashley. Special thanks to Shelby Powers for assisting with web design and original brand identity. Music by Fesleyan Studios. Reproduction or any part of this broadcast without the express permission of The Toll, LLC is prohibited. Get updates at our website, thetollpodcast.com.